thanks again to Loic, who will be presenting to us his summary of learning in lockdown. Over to you.
Brilliant. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I am Loic, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Centre for Education and Youth. So we describe ourselves as a think and action tank. So we do research to support people working in the education and youth sector, and also to shape policy. But we're a bit different because pretty much all of us are ex-teachers or youth workers, so a bit more kind of on the ground than is standard. And yeah, as a team, we've been doing quite a lot of research trying to understand what's going on over the course of lockdown, and how that's affecting young people, and the roles that different bits of the sector are playing. And I think what I was hoping to do today is that obviously you will all know the kind of micro level on the ground side of things so well. You'll be experiencing it day to day, and I can't really tell you much about that because you know that a lot better. But what I thought I'd do is bring together some of the information we've got from research about the sort of macro level, about what's going on nationally, and how some of the trends that you don't necessarily see when your head is buried into managing the day-to-day situation that you're in. So I thought I'd just share bits from 4 key pieces of research, and maybe that will be some useful stimulus to you as you think about your own situations. So the first piece I'm going to talk to you about is a study that we did. Hello, Eloise. A study that we did with the University of Exeter, and this was a survey we put out pretty much immediately when lockdown started to get a sense of what young people's immediate experiences were. And we studied young people and parents, so to see what was going on for them. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is this word cloud, and this is based on all the word we asked young people for open responses on how they were finding lockdown and what it was like for them. And I thought it was quite interesting because there was that kind of question going around about to what extent what was happening was going to be very traumatic to people, or to what extent they'd be happy not to be in school, or what. And what we really saw was this message about kind of boring and repetitive coming through. So it wasn't necessarily that things were massively stressful. It was much more for everyone, or that they were all having epic difficulties. It was much more that sense of just being bored and fed up. So that was the first thing we found. But we did also look into the kind of experiences of what it was like to be at home and to be studying there. And I think one of the key things that came out immediately was around the lack of quiet places to study. So 1/5 of young people not having one of those spaces, and that being much higher amongst the disadvantaged. And I think what really comes through, and which I'm sure you'll all be seeing in your own schools, is this real tale of diverging experiences where, you know, all the inequalities which we see day to day in our schools were just accentuated by what was going on. And even where people had access to a quiet space, even where there was a quiet space in the home, they might not have enough access to it to actually get on with the work that they wanted to do or that schools were setting them. Fortunately, we saw that for most people, there wasn't a particular change in their family dynamics. It wasn't, they weren't yet necessarily finding it a very difficult experience being with their family. But for some, there was much more tension. And obviously, some will have had really extreme experiences. And we've seen the really worrying figures around domestic violence and so on. So what we're seeing there is that, you know, while for most people it might be fine, and in fact for some people it was really positive, building much better relationships with their family, getting to know each other better. For some that was a much less pleasant experience. And in those early stages, we certainly saw that most people were happy with the support they were getting from the school or college. But the messages around communication did come through. So there was a sense that people would like, young people would like better communication from a school or college. What we wanted to find out was what people were concerned about, and this survey was particularly targeting pupils in the higher age group, and so I think it was particularly kind of 16-year-olds and so on, the exam year groups. And they were really deeply worried about their exam results and qualifications and what all that uncertainty would mean for them, how it would affect their future life chances. So that was the kind of bit that was very worrying. And given that we don't know what might happen with exams next year, that could potentially be a bit of uncertainty that's sticking around in your schools for you to be facing. We also spoke to parents, and so here we were interested to see how parents were seeing their role when it came to education. And we saw this kind of heightened sense parents were recognizing that they had more responsibility for education than they did before, and that they saw their role as being around kind of providing continuity wherever possible. So it wasn't just about keeping them busy. Fortunately, most parents did see that there was something about trying to keep an element of continuity to their child's education. Next thing I wanted to share was some of the data that Teacher Tapp has been putting out to understand how learning has varied in lockdown. And so this is some Teacher Tapp data you may have seen about teachers' views on how much work Year 8 pupils should be doing and how much they thought they would be doing. And again, that story of divergence is there. So if you look at the most affluent group, the FSM Q1, you see that most teachers thought that pupils would only be doing 1 or 2 hours work a day. That was about half in the most affluent, whereas it was 4/5 in amongst the more deprived group. So you've got that a real difference in terms of how much work schools thought pupils would be doing, and that was reflected at the primary school level as well. Today, there's this. I've just received this new data from Teacher Tapp. So this is looking, I find really interesting because it may play into your discussion about what your long-term plans are. And so this is about teachers' thoughts on how their teaching might change as a result of what they've learned. So I don't know whether maybe one thing you might want to talk about amongst yourselves is what have you learned from this experience that you might actually bring positively to what you do when you go back. Particularly because one of my reflections on all of this is that whatever happens, we're unlikely anytime soon to be going back to 100% face-to-face model. There'll be people shielding and so on. We might have local lockdowns. So if we're going to a hybrid model in the long run, or at least in the medium term, what does that look like, and what does that mean for the way you deliver teaching? The next piece I want to share with you, and it's the final piece, is a report that came out from ImpactED this week. I don't know if you've seen it at all, which had some encouraging news, I think, which is that overall, it doesn't seem that pupil well-being has dipped too much over lockdown. And I think this is really important because there's been a lot of talk about whether schools need to wholesale refocus on well-being and pastoral concerns on return instead of academic, depending on how much trauma and upheaval there's been for pupils and where their well-being's at. And I think this idea of assessing what that situation is when pupils come back will be really important, because they do see that the disadvantaged pupils have got lower well-being, as you might expect at this point. So I think there's a very different approach for a school, as you know, if you've got wholesale situation where everyone's well-being is suffering and everyone is suffering trauma and you're having to support everyone, versus if for the most part pupils are okay but some have got some really negative experiences. You're much more likely to be looking at smaller group or one-to-one interventions and support if it's a small proportion having very bad experiences compared to if it's a large proportion having kind of medium level difficulties. So I wonder whether perhaps one thing you'll want to think about is which best characterizes the pupils you've got, their experience. Certainly it seems that when providing that home learning, the difficulties getting support from family are very real. Parents really are struggling to provide the help that pupils need in many cases. And so the level of dependence on parents in the work you're setting is definitely something I'm sure you're acutely aware of, but it's definitely to think about. And you can see that data in a bit more detail here. So you've got a series of questions here, and these have been asked of pupils, so whether or not they understand the work they've been given, which is the area with the fewest strongly agreeing. So actually pupils are not necessarily understanding the work they're given. Question, not very high levels of pupils being able to well, not strongly agreeing, but they can get the help they need. So that communication issue coming through again. But I'd also draw attention to some of the ones where it looks like things are going better. So, you know, having a device or having a place to work, you know, the situation is better. So most people are saying that they have those things. But again, when it comes to the minority, that's really important. So it's important not just to look at the averages or the overall figures. You've got, you know, over 10% of pupils disagreeing with a statement that they have a place to work. You've only got just over 90% having the device they need. So that does mean 1 in 10. And I think it's easy to look at figures like that and look at the biggest chunks of the bar graph like that and forget about the 1 in 10 who are having bigger difficulties there. So, but because they're a smaller number, I think it raises the question of kind of triage and really identifying, you know, which pupils are okay with what and which ones are going to need most intensive support. And finally, to look at those well-being figures in a little bit more detail. This is where you see the well-being scale and how it differs between different groups. So seeing some the well-being levels amongst pupil premium and SEND pupils being lower, and encouragingly some quite high levels amongst the EAL pupils compared to others. So seeing some of that divergence and therefore again raising the question of triage and identifying where your pupils are at when they come back and what kind of support they're likely to need. Yeah, I think that is, I've put the links there to the 4 reports I've mentioned, and obviously happy to share those slides so that you've got that, but hopefully that's provides you with a bit of stimulus to have a think about what you might be doing on return. Yeah, you'll obviously know the detail of it much better. So over to you if you've got any questions or thoughts.
So I have a first question, and then Kate, was your hand going up there as well? Okay, so the survey you did with Surrey, oh sorry, so with Exeter,
yeah.
I'm reading my own writing there. Is that ever going to be repeated?
We're trying to get funding to repeat it, yeah.
Because that seems like that would be fantastic if it could go out and just to see, but okay.
Totally. I mean, the advantage of the ImpactED stuff is that they are doing it longitudinally, and so they are really tracking it. They've already got 2 time point pre-lockdown and 2 during lockdown, and they have got a much better sample. So at least they've got some really useful information there, but obviously it's not asking the same detail of questions, not getting the qualitative data that we had. So you know, in terms of the scale of the data and the tracking longitudinally, ImpactED will have really helpful stuff on that, and we hopefully will be able to get some funding soon to do some of the more qualitative stuff. It'd be really interesting to repeat that word cloud, for example, and see that kind of thing. Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you. Kate, you had a question.
Yes, my question was around that last slide at the end, and the fact that the innermost spots were the girls, the PP, and the SEN, and so therefore presumably if you're unfortunate enough to fit all those categories, then there's more likelihood that you're suffering from low well-being. Am I reading that right?
That would be my guess. I mean, unfortunately, I don't have access to that data, but I suspect that it would be a good question. Owen Carter from ImpactED is on Twitter, so I'm sure he'd be happy to look at something like that if you were to ask him. But yeah, I think those intersections are going to be really important.
And I was linking that then to the issue of grades, that these were exam year groups, and I just find that perhaps a little bit more surprising. We know sometimes that the girls do suffer a little bit more from low self-esteem, but in terms of students being worried about grades, my experience was it was the boys that were particularly panicking because they were hoping to pull it out of the bag at the last minute.
Yeah, but those are 2 different reports for different groups. So our Exeter study is that older age group who raised the issue around qualification. Right. The ImpactED will have younger pupils in there, so that could explain that.
Yeah, thank you.
That's good. Are there any more? Oh yes, there's a question there.
So my question's around one of the requests that young people would have, and you said that they wanted sort of one of the studies showed that they wanted better communication, and I was just wondering what the communication alluded to specifically, if that was the remote tasks to be communicated more clearly, or just general contact with teachers. I was wondering if you happen to know that.
I don't. I mean, I think it's interesting if you look at it alongside that ImpactED data saying that they don't necessarily understand tasks. That makes me wonder whether maybe part of what they want communication is maybe they need more to make sure that they understand what they're expected to do. But that was, you know, that's very much finger in the wind and possible. I know Teacher Tapp also had some data, I didn't include it in this, on what approaches to communication schools are using. Which also shows some divergences in how schools are communicating. So it might be worth having a look at that. That might be a bit of a clue, potentially.
Yeah, I certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you. So any more direct questions for Loic? Or are we there for now? Look, if you are happy to send a link to those slides, that would be great.
Yeah.
And I can share them along with the recording of it. And that was really helpful. Thank you for summarising that all.
No worries.
We're aware you have packing to do. So as and when you need to leave us, that's absolutely...
Yeah, I'll stick around until 5 o'clock and then I'll head off.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, if following kind of the presentation or you're looking back at a slide, you have further questions, I'm sure Loic's happy for you to ping an email his way and kind of ask for a bit more information, because that was really interesting to get that overview. And see that big picture. One of the things that struck me was that, I think it's your second to last slide, where a lot of us are worrying about access to tech and whether students kind of like practically have a space to work in, and those two came out not so badly. And then there was some kind of almost practical things that teachers have got more control over in terms of the clarity of explanation, and that idea that it looked like roughly 2/5 of students didn't feel they could ask parents for help if they were doing work is quite a big deal, isn't it? Because I guess that ties into concerns about communication clarity as well, doesn't it? And if a student doesn't know what to do, then two in 10 of them don't. What are they going to do next? It's probably just stop, isn't it? I would imagine, or get quite frustrated. So there's quite a lot to think about there, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, if you think when you're in the classroom, that thing where kids constantly, the minute you explain something, they put up their hand and say, what do I have to do? Or I don't understand, and so on. The number of times you have to re-explain something in the average lesson, right? If you're just sending off a learning pack, that's entirely missing. So those 4 times where they ask you to re-explain it don't happen. Yeah.
And so at this point, if I stop the recording and we can then start to look at our plans for next term, I think those kind of 2 conversations will start to blend into each other. So I'm going to stop that now and check that I have actually done it.